Great, thank you. All right, good afternoon. I'm Professor Mosier, and we start a little late. Let's see, who do I have? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, all present. So you're waiting on me on day one. Mechanically, what they're doing here is they're taping our class, our session. The camera's face to the front of the room, so you don't have to worry about being on camera if you don't want to be on camera. But I hope it doesn't discourage you from being vocal. Your voice will be on the camera. Go ahead, please.
Is this going to be like an everyday thing?
Yeah, here's the history. Here's what's going on. So this is a new class, Introduction to Food Systems. I developed this class, and it's a class that we need to teach at all satellite campuses. The faculty at the satellite campuses have done a lot of good work getting ready, but to be more comfortable, they wanted to have an opportunity to see basically how I roll in terms of my approach, which I think is a good thing. Again, it's a new class, so I haven't had a lot of time. I have a message. I know exactly what I want to tell you. We'll just see how that rolls out and how we pick up on it. But first of all, I do want to welcome you to the Introduction to Food Systems. I'm Professor Mosier, Darrell Mosier, and I've been at the school now going on 10 years. Hard to believe, a long time. My background's a little different than a lot of people here. When I graduated from college, I worked in the computer industry. After about 15 years, I was able to leave the industry, and I got involved in agriculture. I bought a farm. And through my involvement on the farm, I connected with the food world. I mean, basically, if you're going to grow a vegetable, grow a fruit, if you're going to raise an animal protein, you need to market it. And right off the bat, my thought was to market it right to the end user. So I worked with a lot of chefs. And it was through that relationship with chefs, through my involvement on the farm, that I got connected with the Culinary Institute. The Culinary Institute was a very good account for me. I met these folks back in 1990, so a long time ago, at a conference. And throughout the time until relatively recently, I would deliver down here every day, something from the farm. So here at the school, we do have good intentions relative to local seasonal. We buy a lot of product from growers and people here in the Hudson Valley. We can talk about it as the class goes on. And clearly that's something you're probably all familiar with, the farm-to-table type of approach. This class, well, will have pieces of that. The real intention is kind of behind the scenes aspects of our food system. I guess before we go any farther, I'd like to hear a little bit from you folks. Let's see. Usually you talk and I ask you a few questions. Who here already has a college degree? Okay, so a handful, not uncommon. Who here is here because they want to be a chef? They want to be executive chef someday. Okay, not everybody raised their hand. I'm kind of interested in those of you who don't want to maybe work in a kitchen or at least be an executive chef. What are your interests? Someone that did not raise their hand. Please, your name?
Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie.
I want to work in hotel management.
Hotel management, so hospitality focus.
Yeah.
Very good. Great opportunity. I mean, the hospitality piece, whether you work in the food world or directly in hotel management, hospitality is that's what this business is all about. You can't be successful unless you make people feel good about themselves. You can be a pretty lousy chef, but give the people a nice evening, treat them really well, and you'll probably have an okay business. On the other hand, you can be the greatest chef in the world. And if you forget the tenets of hospitality, you will not be successful. So it's good that you recognize that early on. Who else? Please, your name?
David.
David?
I love food. I haven't really decided if I wanted to be a executive chef one day or not. I just know I love food.
You want to work in the kitchen to start, certainly.
Maybe. I think so.
And pretty soon you get a good idea, because for those of you without a lot of experience, you'll need to start off on an extern. So I'm guessing you're planning that now, right?
Yes. Yes.
And anybody, someone had mentioned earlier, it's going to be February when you move off an externship. Anybody looking for a special experience? Anybody know enough about what they want to do that they've kind of targeted not just a specific restaurant name, but the type of either cuisine or the type of philosophy that the restaurant has. Go ahead, please. Your name?
Hosoi.
Hosoi?
Hosoi.
Hosoi.
Yes. And I want to just what I was looking for is someone, a chef who has started the restaurant, someone who has gone through rough times, so I can pick up from his mistakes, and just not only a chef but also the owner of the restaurant.
Okay. And that's a lot of possibilities. A lot of chefs that really do well in the industry. That's their lifetime goal. They want to have total control. The way you do that is by having it as your own business. Good. Any other people want to share a little? Let me ask, what type of experience do you have? Who has significant kitchen experience? Anyone? Please, and what type of kitchen?
Restaurant.
A restaurant, and is continental just a basic American cuisine, or is it a steakhouse? Was it a chain steakhouse or a private steakhouse? Private steakhouse. What temperature they cook their steaks, you know?
Whatever the customer is.
No, not to the temp, I'm sorry. What temperature was the grill?
The grill?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I'm just curious. Yeah, I had a friend who worked.
Really hot.
Yeah, they are really hot. 1,200 degrees sometimes, and they cook really fast. Of course, they cook to the customer specification. All right, let's do attendance. Now, I do have a group leader here.
Yes.
Great. Today it's easy because your whole group is here, aren't they?
Yes, always.
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 There's a good group leader then. So this will be really fast, every class. But for now, I need... This is a problem. Let's see. So I can move this. I need to turn my editing on. There we go. And I need to take attendance. We'll be talking about Moodle a little bit. Obviously, you're familiar with Moodle. But I did see that not everyone made it out on Moodle yet. There were a couple of you who have not looked at this class, which by now I would have thought you understood that you could have pre-day one assignments. Have you seen those before in other classes? And again, not everybody has visited Moodle, so clearly not everybody's done the pre-day one. But this will go fast here. All present. This will be a little better. I do want to read your names though because I want to get to know you. Somebody just kind of walk through. If I pronounce your name incorrectly, please correct me. Or if you would rather be called something other than your formal name here on the registrar's list, please let me know that as well. In the interest of hospitality, that's how I'll refer to you, okay? Michael. Here. Thank you. Bumjin. Here. Thank you. Adam. Here. Good. Timothy. Yejin. Thank you. Sulji. Here. Thank you. Ashley.
Here.
Front row. Ashley. Darian.
Here.
Good, thank you. Nicholas. Okay. Angela. Thank you.
Hosoi.
Hosu.
Hosoi.
Hosui. 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 Thank you. Very good. Kieran. Kieran, thank you. John.
Here.
David.
Here.
Stephanie.
Here.
Yes, let's see. Yuan. Very good. Very good. All right, IFS, what's it about? Introduction to Food System. If we read up here in the introduction, I have this concept of cooking for the environment. Surely, if you were looking at the PowerPoint, you would have seen that. Really, what I'm trying to do with this class is I'm getting you to think beyond the ingredient at hand. I'm getting you to think about what it took to bring that ingredient either to your plate, to your restaurant, to the guest table. All too often, the system seems to be hidden. There is no transparency. What you need to do as a food professional, like I think everyone needs to do, but certainly you folks, is you need to ask the questions. You really need to understand. And the reason is, simply as I put up here, our food system uses a lot of natural resource, more than you can imagine. And as a consequence, those natural resources are becoming scarce. As they become scarce, it will eliminate opportunity, choice. And that would not be a good thing. If we don't change your path later in your careers, you are young enough, you will not have the same selection potential that you have today. Food prices could get very expensive. There could be lots of impacts. So early in this class, what I'm going to do is kind of take you through those natural resources and juxtapose them to our food production system so that you'll understand the magnitude or the true cost of your choices in the kitchen, okay? A good example, I think, is with this apple and the information behind it under the heading of environutrition. Kind of a new word. The nutritionists are at the point now where they recognize when they recommend nutrition or understand nutrition, they can't do it in the absence of sustainable choices. Would it do us any good if we ate something that was perhaps had the best nutrient profile, but if it damaged our planet, so that in the future it would not be a choice for someone? Of course not. And this chart kind of talks about that. On the left, when you think about traditional nutrition, you just look at it. You know, what are the micronutrients? What are the macronutrients? From a chef's perspective, you look at it, certainly you're concerned about those things, but you also look about other elements, right? If you're cooking an apple, you look at its texture. Does it hold texture when it's cooked? I mean, these are the things you think about. And what we're really saying, now look over to the right-hand side, you have to ask other questions. Was it produced sustainably? In this case, were there harmful pesticides or synthetic fertilizers? What kind of labor was used in the harvest or its production? And you have to understand the processing in terms of, it says here, toxic chemicals. But in any case, you have to look at the whole food system. Okay, before I go any deeper, what I want to do is kind of go through the syllabus, primarily so you can understand how you will be graded in this class, but some other responsibilities as well. The course guide, primarily a one-day document, although you're welcome to look at it all you want. But it does have the grading. It does have the rubrics for your grades. It'll give you a good understanding of my expectations. Couple quotes here. Anybody familiar with Wendell Berry? Kind of a farmer philosopher from Missouri. And here's one of his many, many quotes. But how we eat determines to a considerable extent how the world is used. If you've never really thought about that, it's pretty profound, and it's absolutely true. Our choices make a huge difference. In terms of office hours, I need to know your schedule. What's your schedule look like on Tuesdays?
We're free after 2.
You are free after 2. So if I have office hours 3 to 5 on Tuesdays, that could work for you. Good. I will be in my office 3 to 5 on Tuesdays. What I recommend, however, if you need to speak with me, send me an email to make sure that I stay close to that office, okay? But I will be available not just Tuesdays, I'm actually in my office 3 to 5, Tuesday through Friday. Okay, so we use that for office hours for this group. Here's my user ID. Everyone see it? D_Mosier@culinary.edu. If you need to contact me, you can go to the syllabus, or hopefully by now you know how to use the portal and to find the faculty IDs there, right? All right, here's how you grade it. Really straightforward. There are 3 quizzes in this class. Quiz 1, Quiz 2 are in Moodle. You will take those quizzes in Moodle. By the way, Thursday, are you also done at 2 on Thursday? So I need to negotiate a time with you that works. I typically won't use class time for those first 2 quizzes. I'll expect you to do them outside of class. Class is done by 2, would 2 to 4 on one of those days work for all of you, or no? Some of you have to leave? Be thinking about it. We will revisit it before the first quiz. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, so you're saying to like open the availability for us to take the quiz outside of class?
Yes.
Just like what time block works best for us?
Right, and I only want to leave it open for a short period, a couple hours.
Right.
So I really need your consensus. I need to know your availability.
When is the first quiz, on Thursday?
The first quiz, no, it's in 2 weeks. So it'll be on a Thursday, and ideally I'd like to open up, let's say, from 2 to maybe 5 in the afternoon. The test itself shouldn't take more than 20 minutes if you're well prepared. But that's my intention. You can think about this, and before that test, if anyone has a problem, we'll have to come up with those specific solutions, okay? So 2 quizzes in class, they are each worth 20% of your grade, so there's 40% of your grade. There is a final quiz. The final quiz will be a little bit longer. It will be in class on the last day. So that will be on paper here in the classroom. That's worth 30 points. That takes us to 70. You have a single written assignment. It, too, will be due the last day of class, day 12. In that assignment, you will respond in roughly 200 to 400 words online in Moodle to a question that I pose that requires that you apply some of the knowledge that you've gained throughout the class in terms of answering it. As we get close to that, it will be more specific, but you will get a chance now, if you wish, to go into day 12 and actually look at that final paper. And mechanics, if you've never done a writing assignment within Moodle, I'll show you how to do that. It's pretty straightforward. So that's basically it, with the exception of 10 points. 10 points are for professionalism. What does that mean? By now, I hope you know what that means. You're here in class on time. You are well prepared. You are engaged. A big part of this class should be discussion, so that you are prepared to ask questions. And to that point, my expectation is every class from here on out, each one of you will bring on a separate piece of paper a handwritten question, an observation, something of significance from that topic. So if we do have time and the discussion is waning, I can always ask to hear what your question is, right? I may collect those, and I may not. But if I do, and you are not prepared, you do not have it, that will impact your professionalism grade. Please.
Is it a handwritten question and observation?
No, one or the other. I mean, it may be that you just something that you need a little further information on. You read about it. I would encourage you on these topics, and I'll show you my expectation relative to each of the units, but I would encourage you not only to do the required reading that I have for you, but since the topic should be interesting to you, to maybe do some kind of research, find an outside source, find something that's germane to the topic, and bring something a little extra to the class, if you will. Everybody understand? Pretty straightforward. I mean, my real goal for this class certainly is for you to learn, but I really want to reach you. I want to connect with you. I want you to start asking questions maybe you've never asked before. Let me ask now. I mean, you've all heard the term sustainability. We'll be defining that. We'll be taught. Essentially, this is a sustainability course. But how many of you actually really consider sustainability in your day-to-day lives? I'm hoping some of you already have that sensibility. Is there anyone here that feels pretty strongly? You've been too busy to even think about it, haven't you? This class is really important, folks. You're going to see some things in this class that I think will really surprise you. And they'll make you question some of your behaviors. We are, as consumers, consumptive. It's just the nature of things. Some geographies, developed countries, for example, much more consumptive than other countries. It's catching up with us. It's a big deal. It wasn't a big deal in 1900 when we had 1.4 billion people. It's a real big deal today, and when we approached 2000, we went close to 7 billion. Today we're 7.4, 7.5. And we're headed, anybody that's paid attention to the population dynamics, we're headed towards, by the 2100, perhaps 11 billion people. In 200 years, that's a huge growth. So we all need to eat. And everything of value comes from the earth. All our food, it's easier to understand with plants that grow or animals you raise, but everything comes from a natural resource, right? We have to extract some resource for the production process. And those resources are very scarce. Okay, so any questions on how you're graded? Please.
It says on Moodle something about key terms and study questions.
Yes.
Will those factor into
The quizzes?
yeah, or just
Yeah, the key, I'm still working on I have key terms. I may do a lot of editing while this class is going on, but the week before, certainly not in the middle of the unit. Key terms are things of significance. They are things that I'll probably be covering in my lecture. The study questions are basically, what do I think are some of the important concepts that should have come across in that lecture? So yeah, if you're comfortable with the key terms, if you can answer study questions, you will be well positioned to do well in the quizzes.
do you want us to type those out and have them?
You do not need to.
Okay, just no.
The only homework that I might collect is those questions that are expected in class for every class. And again, those questions specific to the unit. I'll go back out of here. Now, each unit will have an introductory document. Today, Unit 1, it's a welcome, it's an introduction. We're not going to get too deep in the woods, anything other than a general discussion of the course. But here was an introductory document for you. Hopefully you all read that. That's your first step. Read that introductory document. It kind of sets the theme. It gives you an overview of that day's lesson. So today it says, welcome to Introduction to Food Systems. And by the way, I won't be reading these every week. You can clearly read these. But just to introduce you to this concept. There is one of these introduction documents for each of the units. So today's food system, it is immense and in large part follows the industrial manufacturing model across all elements of its supply chain. We'll look at supply chains in a minute. Production through disposal. And as a food professional, you do have an obligation to understand the food system, and in particular to explore the detail, much of which is hidden. Things we just don't think about. And it's hidden not so much to exclude you from its intricacies, which can be good and bad, but because of a matter of scale. It's just so remote, we just don't have a sense. I mean, that's one of the great appeals to Farm to Table, right? Know your grower, know where the food comes from, watch it grow. But that's a small part of our food system, especially in this country. Gary Snyder, who's an environmentalist, he wrote this essay. He rewrote this quote within an essay. He says, our distance from the source of our food enables us to be superficially more comfortable and distinctly more ignorant. That's pretty powerful. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But if you read that and think about it, he says a lot with that one statement. In reality, we can no longer afford this ignorance. The costs of our food system across all aspects of our life, we cannot view them as acceptable because they're certainly not sustainable into the future. And it should be of no surprise that something as basic as a source of energy and nutrition, and that's what food is, right? We eat foremost for energy. You're all familiar with calories, right? Calorie is a measure of a unit of energy. But not only do we need energy, ideally, as you've already learned, hopefully, we want a good nutrient profile associated with those calories. And those resources impact the elements, all elements of our being. Social, health, for example, economic, financial elements, and certainly our environment. This class will largely be focused on the environment. That's my interest. I like the out-of-doors. I'm an environmentalist. We have a spectacular planet. I'd like to see it kept that way. And as we go through the class, you will be amazed to see the elements of our food system and the significant impacts they have on this planet. Truly surprising if you've never looked at it. So this course will examine the natural resources consumed and exploited in the procurement of our foods. You'll be exposed to many consequences of our current practices. And upon completing the class, you will have the necessary knowledge to make good choices. And then develop a best set of practices. And they can be different for each of us. But hopefully they will consider those things that we learn in the class. So it's hopefully you'll build on this knowledge and perform in a leadership role as we embark on rebuilding our food system. Okay, one more time. Every one of the units has an introduction. This one's very short. Many of them are 3-4 pages. Let me walk you through a PowerPoint. And again, just to give you an overview of the topic for Introduction to Food Systems. This is not working. Here we go. Okay, so what's the problem? I have here transparency. Back to the quote we saw from Gary Snyder. Our distance from the source of our food enables us to be superficially more comfortable and distinctly more ignorant. What do you think he means by that? Please.
It's so easy not to think about. It's actually a lot easier not to think about.
It's really easy not to think about. Just think about where we are as a population today, at least in a developed country. If we have the money, we no longer worry about seasonality. We can eat virtually anything we want at any time. And further, one of the reasons we don't think about it too much is because of our efficiencies, our productivity within the food system, and our desire to utilize natural resources unsustainably, food prices are really, really low. In the United States today, the average American spends 9.7% of their disposable income on food, less than 10%. In 1950, they spent 30%. So it is significantly less in the last generation. Because of that, we don't have to think as much. The problem is that the ignorance is catching up. And again, if people like yourselves don't understand our food system, then who will? I'm really looking to you as chefs, as food professionals, to first understand and then second apply some leadership and maybe create some changes. All right, what does a food system look like? Pictorially, here it is. There's 13 boxes in this picture. It really breaks out along 5 elements. The first element would be raw material extraction. The second element would be processing. A third element then would be distribution, the transportation piece. The fourth element would be consumption. Obviously, we grow it to eat it. And then the last piece is disposal. So if you kind of walk through all these boxes, you can see it's fairly extensive. And what you really need to think about is, and for each of these boxes, there are inputs and outputs. There's an energy flow. There is a flow of matter into each of these boxes. And the more energy and the more matter that goes into each of these boxes, by the time we get to the final one, the more costly the food item. So we'll be looking at supply chains both for fruits and vegetables in day 5. Then day 6, we'll be looking at the supply chain for animal proteins. To take the food supply chain and make it a little more direct, let's just look at broiler chicken supply chain. Maybe the first thing you want to do is say, well, why am I looking at broiler chicken? Any guesses? Please.
It's one of the more popular ones right now.
Well, we can have a supply chain for anything. I didn't draw this up. I found this. I liked it. That's one reason I'm doing it. But the other thing is, it is the #1 animal protein that we consume in the U.S. On a U.S. per capita consumption, we consume 100 pounds of chicken every year. Every single person in the U.S. eats 100 pounds of chicken in the U.S. It, too, across the planet, for those people that eat animal proteins, it is the most significant animal protein as well. In fact, by some measures, it's certainly the most populous production animal on the planet. In the U.S. alone, we raise, through the course of the year, 9 billion chickens. And at any point in time, we have 330 million laying hens. Scale. If you had 9 billion chickens we raise, and we have at any point in time 330 million chickens. Big numbers. Now, maybe the first thing that should pop into your head, and this is important to understand the big picture, how many people are there in the U.S.? Yeah, 330, 340 million people, yeah. So basically, there's a chicken. For every single one of us sitting here, somewhere there's a layer hen, probably in a cage, laying eggs so that we can use eggs in our food system. A lot of times that begs the question when I mention something to the effect sitting in a cage, there's a whole other element that we really won't be talking about in detail in this class, but that has to do with animal welfare. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we do day 6, when we talk about animal protein production. Okay, but you never really thought about a broiler chicken supply chain, and here it is. First 2 rows, soy growing, soy harvesting, corn harvesting, fish harvesting. Where'd the fish come from? Well, they came from somewhere. Why are we harvesting fish for chickens? Yeah. Basically, when you're a factory farmer, what you want to do is you want to get a good feed conversion. In other words, for every pound of feed that you feed the chicken, you want to grow X amount. Chickens, by the way, all birds early in their life stage have a very good feed conversion. One of the ways to get optimized feed conversion is by crank up the protein. And the fish play a role there. High protein. So on the front end, think about those inputs: fertilizer, pesticides, fuel for tractors. There's a lot of inputs. Then we get to the point where we have the chick production, the hatching. So you got to start with a chick. That's got to come from somewhere. Somebody raises chickens for the broiler industry. Those eggs are not consumed. Those eggs are basically fertilized, and they hatch, and that provides us with the chick. Once we grow out the chick, and by the way, broiler industry today, you can grow a chicken to live weight from a day-old chick to 5.5 pound live weight in 50 days. Really, really fast process. Needs to be processed, needs to be retailed, needs to be prepared, needs to be consumed. And this supply chain, consumption is the last box, but really, what is the last box? We saw it in the last one. Who remembers? Please. Disposal. We're going to talk a lot about waste. Waste is a big deal. If you never really looked at waste, never tried to understand it. Certainly, if you're really interested in this industry, you know, there's a lot of chefs that are kind of making a name for themselves by doing nose-to-tail cooking, repurposing waste in the kitchen and then model to create new dishes and things like that, it's a great thing to do. I mean, once we've gotten our food items all the way to that last stage, it's very costly not to consume them. Some of you may be familiar with this. This has been publicized really well, I think, in the last number of years, thanks to National Geographic, thanks to the United Nations and the World Health Organization. But the estimate is by 2050, so not too far off in the future, certainly in your productive years of your work life, the expectation is we will need to produce 2 times more food than we're producing now to feed the population in as little as 33 years. We talked about the U.S. population. Anybody know what the world population is today? All right, we'll call it 7.4 billion. That's today. 2050, where do we think it's going to be? No. This is interesting. 9 billion. So I'm going from 7.4 billion to 9 billion by 2050. That's a 20% increase in population. But based on this statistic here, it's saying that it's a 2x or 100% increase in food to map to a 90% population increase. How can that be? Please.
Is it factoring in livestock and stuff too?
Factoring livestock? Yeah, all food production, yes.
So, I mean, like, is it considering livestock as things we need to feed as well? Like feeding more animals?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they're part of our food system, right? You don't just get animal proteins without feeding them. So they're part of the food system. And maybe what you're hinting at, we're going to do a unit on energy here, but every time I move up within the food system, energy levels or trophic levels, I lose a factor of efficiency by 10x factor. What do I mean by that? You can feed 10 people on the plants that you feed, let's say, a steer that would only feed 1 person. So that's really the reason, by going up 20% of the population, we need to double our food production. That's the reason, because diets are changing across the planet. Developed countries where they largely ate plant-based diets are now slowly, based on economic strength, transitioning to more of a European or American type diet. And as they do that, it's going to require a lot more food, and based on the current model, a lot more natural resource to produce that food. So that's the issue. It's a huge issue. It's a challenge that scares a lot of people. And obviously, if we don't meet that challenge, what are the consequences? Yeah. And here's the story. Here's what a lot of people don't want to recognize. We are just one of nature's creatures. Many people think we're the only creature that's not governed by the laws of nature because of our intellect. We can do things, but in reality, we're kidding ourselves. Of course we're governed by the law of nature. And just like we see with other animals at different times in various systems, we too, and you see it all the time. There are many people on the planet. There's almost 1 billion people today that are food insecure. You familiar with that term? Insecure basically says at some point in a period of time, whether it be a week or a month, they don't have enough food. So really, today out of 7.4 billion, what do we have? Almost 1 billion, 18%. That's a lot of people. Even in the U.S., where you think is a very well-developed country, there are people that are food insecure. There are programs in place in most developed countries to remedy that. But in the U.S. today, 48 million out of our 330 million get some level of food assistance. So it's not a great story. So we will talk more about this, the future projections relative to where we need to be with our food system. And it all comes down to resources. Again, everything of value comes from the earth, and we are on a bad path. Not just in our food system, in a lot of systems, but the food system is easy to get your arms around. And of course, here, as food professionals, is something we should understand. So, United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. We're going to be looking at some data from that organization. So it's a worldwide organization, food United Nations Food Agriculture Organization. It's kind of analogous to in the United States here, the United States Department of Agriculture. They've done a projection and they look at resources and they say we're utilizing these resources about 30% faster than they can be replenished. That's pretty easy math. At some point, they're going to disappear, right? Please.
Took a class a little while back on, blood correlations, basically, and it talks about capacity, as in, like, was it the tragedy of the commons?
Okay, so you talk about carrying capacity of a system. The tragedy of the commons, we can talk about in this class. I'm glad you heard of this. I teach this. I also teach here in our bachelor's program, and I teach a class very similar to this, however, much more detail-oriented. I do discuss the tragedy of the commons in that class, and I will tell you, the average class, no one has ever heard of it until I bring it to the discussion. So you've impressed me. How it ties to carrying capacity, it's not a direct connection, but if you want to talk about any point in this class, we certainly can. Here I have another quote, and this one's from a professor at Columbia, very prolific, does a lot of writing, pretty popular guy, Jeffrey Sachs. And he's looking at a projection that was made long ago that we'll look at in a little bit. And this is his observation. And his observation is this: in countless ways, we have not gotten more for less, but rather more for more. As we've converted rich stores of natural capital into high flows of current consumption. I can't argue with that either. Simply put, we are a population, more countries more so than others, but we are a population driven by consumption. And because our resources are scarce, we do need to transition into a population a little more focused on conservation. And again, these are the things that we'll talk about in this class. Let me give you some facts. If you haven't bought in to the need to be sitting in those seats and learning about this yet, hopefully these facts will help sway you. Here in the U.S., 50% of the continental U.S. basically is used in agriculture. A big piece of it, truthfully, is pasture land. Not real efficient, but we do raise animals. So that's your western U.S. Across the world, this may surprise you, 80% of all fresh water use is used in agriculture. In fact, in terms of pumped water, it can be as high as 90% in a lot of countries. And in the U.S., 20% of all energy we use as a nation is in the food system. Now, that's 1 in 5 units, 20%. Big deal, it's significant, but this next piece is really significant. It turns out our energy use in the U.S. has been pretty flatlined for a while. Part of it had to do with our economic shutdown. If you study energy and something like food, you will see that they're tightly coupled. If I have a 10% increase in food prices, it's because they had a 10% increase in energy use. So they're virtually one and the same. But 80% of new energy between 2007 and 2012 was in the food system. So it is responsible as the fastest growing segment of energy. There are some really good sources from the USDA's Economic Research Service. So I'll just click on one here. So here we have our USDA. As a taxpayer, we pay for this. They have an Economic Research Service, and it basically gives you an overview, in this case, of the resource of water. And what does it say? Agriculture is a major user of ground and surface water in the U.S., accounting for approximately 80% of the nation's water consumption. We're not going to read the whole thing, but clearly there's a lot of information here where they've collected, and most of my facts, most of the things that I talk about in this class, you should always ask me where they come from if you are uncomfortable and want to understand them better. They are well documented in some good source. Those facts surprise you. The watershed, that's a lot of, and we're gonna do a unit on water, but when you dig down on the covers, it's pretty significant, because while it is the most, water is the most abundant resource on the planet, fresh water is not so much. Any guesses how much of the water on the planet is fresh water?
3.
What'd you say?
3.
3%? Well, less than 3%, but that's a good guess, yeah.
Just 2.
Yeah, just about 2%. So the rest of it is salt water. And of that 2%, how much of it can we really access? About half of it, 1%. The rest of it is locked in ice caps. So we really just, there's very little water. It is extremely precious. And certainly people maybe from Northern California, people from Sub-Saharan Africa, people from the Middle East know what a precious resource it is. We need to take care of it. Here's the one that's easy to grasp and really should make you think about your practices right from the get-go. And we'll do a unit on waste. In the U.S., 40% of all foods are wasted. They are never consumed. 40%, almost half. Tragic. You know what's more tragic? Where's it wasted? Out of that 40%, a quarter of it is wasted at the restaurant or home. 25%. I mean, basically, you know what that means? It means next time you go shopping, watch somebody walking out of the store with 4 bags and suggest to them they might as well drop one now. Because it's not going to get consumed. That's the fact. It is a huge, huge problem. You'll have access to really good articles in the units. Here's a great article, easy to read. Doesn't look like it jumped up, does it? There you go. This is from the Natural Resource Defense Council. Real detailed look at food waste in the U.S. By the way, do you think food is wasted in a developed country like the U.S.? I said we were about a 40% waste. Worldwide, this is about 33%. How would you contrast that to developed versus undeveloped countries? Think about the U.S. versus, let's say, Sub-Saharan Africa. Do you think they waste as much as we do?
No.
No.
The bad news is they actually do. The difference is they don't waste it at all when it's in their hands in the home. They have very little waste. But because of issues in transportation, refrigeration, distribution, a lot gets lost. I mean, it is kind of interesting. We will, it's a short class. I cover a lot of material, big picture, kind of a survey class. But, as you think about this, as you write your questions, have your observations, we can talk in detail. But again, I want to kind of set the stage. I want you to understand the big picture. In Sub-Saharan Africa, there are many populations where people consume essentially a single food item. 80% of the calories may come from a single food source. It's a very different world when you think locally. Look globally today, 1 in 6 people today are eating an insect for a meal. And a good thing. Insects are, I would say, sustainable. They're nutrition. It would be a good choice. Maybe more in the world should do that. It's a very large world, and there are very great differences across this planet. So here it is, how we're losing 40% of our food from farm to fork. And it goes in great detail. This paper is, I guess it didn't come up as a PDF. That's 21 pages. It won't be too long. Again, we'll reserve this for our unit on waste. Three last facts. 80% of global deforestation occurs because of our food system. What's the connection? Please.
You need for more land to grow crops.
There you go. We need more room to grow more crops. Remember, consumption versus conservation. Why don't we just grow more crops on the land we already have if we can? Interestingly, a lot of this deforestation occurs in developing countries. Certainly everybody's familiar with South America and the rainforest. Most of it is not to grow food for people. It's to grow food, soy corn for animals that people eventually consume. Anybody know besides just the impact visually of losing your global forest, what is another significant impact of that? Very considerable, please.
Destroys species.
So we have the impacts to biodiversity. We will do a unit on biodiversity. I'll walk you through all these units in a little bit. Absolutely. Agriculture, it is estimated, may be the primary factor resulting in a great risk relative to extinction to about 1 in 4 mammals. That's huge. Those are some projections that we'll see. 1 in 4. But what do rainforests do for us? Please.
Air recycling?
Air recycling, absolutely. They are a major element of our carbon cycle. We want to keep carbon, and hopefully we'll see the carbon cycle, maybe even in middle school, but we'll look at it a little bit when we do the unit on externalities. We, as a consequence of deforestation and grabbing greater lands, we've changed the balance of carbon between our Earth's soil and our atmosphere. Certainly, you all heard of greenhouse gases and global warming, right? This deforestation is one of the primary reasons for that. So 30% of all greenhouse gases are related to agriculture. 30%. Plays a huge role in climate change and biodiversity loss. Back to the challenge. 2050, 20% more people, 9 billion people. How do we do it without depleting our natural resources? Fortunately, there's a lot of people thinking about it. One of your pre-reads was from National Geographic. Here it is. How do we feed 9 billion people? How many of you read this? Not, day one. Good. You absolutely need to do the readings from here on out prior to the lesson. What we're going to see here, share my screen, so. That one more time, then I'm back out. All right. There we go. Where will we find enough food for 9 billion people? And what we have here is a 5-step plan. We'll talk about these steps. Here it is. By 2050, we'll need to feed 2 billion more people. How can we do that without overwhelming the planet? And again, it's the resources of energy, resources of water, soil. Here's a single production plant with 8 million heads. Remember I talked about factory farming? And by the way, I certainly have to understand that our system has, for various reasons, economy of scale, specializations, it's gotten really large. And we'll look at that later in the class. But you think there's any good things associated with? I think early today I told you one good thing. What was one good thing?
Oh, did you already said?
Yeah. Or anything that you can think of.
Well, that we have more efficient ways to water crops, which is easy.
Well, there is, that's the focus, and we'll talk about it. We need to be more efficient, but right now we aren't especially efficient. We are, there's efficiencies associated with scale, if you're getting to that. Go ahead.
The paycheck thing, was 10% goes to food.
Yeah, food's cheap. That's, on one hand, that's a great thing, right? It's cheap. But again, it's cheap unrealistically because we're not accounting for all costs. Go ahead.
We also
Right, we are no longer restricted by seasonality. As a chef, as a consumer, you can eat basically anything you want, anytime, providing you have the economic means to pay for it. Certainly, eating things out of season, things coming from another continent, can be a lot more expensive than they are if they were local and seasoned. But you have the ability to purchase them. There is a 5-step plan here. I want to talk through the pieces. Here's what the experts say. Here's what we need to do. The first step, we can't keep grabbing land. We need to freeze the footprint. I mean, globally, we're using about 40% of our planet's surface area for agriculture. That ought to be enough. And of course, because that's associated with deforestation and other land grabs, those negative consequences, we can no longer accommodate those. And here it is. It shows across the world, basically ice-free land, agriculture, 38.6% of all surface area. The next step says, let's get more efficient, grow more on the land that we have. That has to do with conservation, has to do with efficiency. That's challenging. In the Industrial Revolution, especially through domestication of plants and animals, we got better yields than we ever had. Can that go on forever? Some people think so. What's the technology today that is certainly being talked about as a possible means for becoming more efficient or producing more? Yeah. Hydroponics is an approach. It works, hydroponic. Hydroponic is inside growing where you grow plants only in a soil-based medium and feed them a continuous nutrient source with water. Aquaponics, which is the new generation of hydroponics, was aquaponic, we're familiar with that one. That's where you grow plants and raise fish in the same relative area, and actually you filter the water from the fish growing, and that's where your nutrient comes from. So it's a closed system, very efficient. Now I was thinking genetic engineering, GMOs. That's where a lot of the research is. We are not going to talk about GMOs in detail in this class. It's a very complicated topic. You'd have to read way too much, and certainly be much more than we would do in a day. But as we get to some topics where it's tightly coupled and you want to talk about a little bit, certainly we can. NES Geographic in this pre-read does a good job of giving you some GIS, Geographical Information System data, where you can actually look where agriculture is, how our crops are used, and where yields could improve. Let's just look at how our crops are used here. Across the world, the green is for food, the purple is for feed and fuel, the feed for animal proteins. And if you look here, you'll see there's an awful lot of purple. In the U.S., 100 million of our acres, we grow corn on. That corn, only about 6% of it goes to humans for feed. And we're spending 100 million acres on it. A lot of it goes to create ethanol for energy. The same amount goes to feed our animal proteins. Some of it goes into special products like binders, high fructose corn syrup that aren't used directly as food, but used in processing of foods. Not a great story. 3, here it is, conservation. We need to use our resources more efficiently. Interesting picture from Brazil, a rainforest that was devastated. There are still swatches of land, primarily because a national protected tree existed there, and it was illegal for them to take those down. Here's the big one. Shift diets. It's estimated the food that we produce today, if everyone went to a plant-centric diet across the planet, with the food we produce today, we could feed 12 billion people. Problem solved. Anybody willing to give up their animal proteins? Hopefully you're willing to cut back. It makes a big difference. News report this morning, the New York City public school system, next year we'll do a meatless Monday. Meatless Monday. It's a trend that's been around for a while. It's getting a little more popular. I mean, that's one day a week. That makes a huge difference. A huge difference. Meatless Monday, an individual that takes a day off of eating meat, that eats the average per capita diet in the U.S., by taking one day off every week for a year, you have to reduce your carbon footprint, carbon dioxide in particular, but the equivalent of a transatlantic jet flight. That's how huge your diet is. Our diet is responsible for 7 to 9 metric tons of carbon in the atmosphere on a per capita basis in the U.S. 7 to 9 tons. It's huge. And finally, let's reduce the waste. I mean, right off the bat, if we have 40% waste, food waste, and we could utilize it, we could feed people, we could feed technically 40% more people right there, right? So there are lots of levers. There are lots of approaches to being more benign relative, not just to our planet, but it will have good consequences on people as well. And those are the type of things we're going to cover here in this class. All right. Let me go out of here. This was one of your pre-reads, so just quickly go to this article. Again, much like Tragedy of the Commons, it's a prognostication that I think anybody in the food industry should be at least familiar with. And it was an English philosopher back in 1798, Thomas Robert Malthus. He predicted that the short-term gains in living standards would inevitably be undermined as human population growth outstripped our food production, thereby driving our standards back to subsistence, back to the hunter-gatherer days. And really, one of the rationales was he had seen this through the history of civilization occur a number of times. I mean, we can look at the archaeological record from the Middle East. Look at the country of Iran. Iran, I think, today has just under 7 million people. 3,000 years ago, they had 35 million. Where'd they go? They died because they overwhelmed the resources, and eventually the food system collapsed. Tragic. So he had made those observations. In fact, he thought it was going to happen in a relatively short time. It didn't happen. Why do you think it didn't happen? Please.
Global trade.
Okay, well, global trade certainly helped because now we have the ability, if there were inefficiencies or breakdowns in systems in one area to trade, we could accommodate that. But really, it was technology. We just got better at extracting resources. But again, those resources are finite. There is a point in time when no matter how good you get, if they're not there, you can't have them. So there are a lot of people that basically are revisiting this prognostication and saying that maybe he was just off by a couple centuries. My point is, and my interest in teaching this is, wouldn't it be a shame if with our intelligence, our ability to perceive, understand, we didn't take corrective action and let something like this happen? There'd be no excuse. I don't know if we will. I don't know if we will take a corrective action. We seem to be too much as a population, concerned about our time and now and our personal needs. You should be, but there's a Native American saying. The Native American saying goes, "We have not inherited this land from our grandparents, but we have borrowed it from our children." That's a very different viewpoint. Do we care about the future? And I'll leave it up to each of you. But hopefully by the end of the class, I will have some, well, disciples might be too strong of a term, but I'll have some people that have bought in and found this whole topic fairly appealing. Got a quick video for you. Basically tries to bring up the same points that I've been talking about. It's from Loma Linda University, and they have a food sustainability center, and it's easy to watch and it's short, so we'll go ahead and do this. Too loud? Download problem here. What did you think of those statistics relative to the beef versus plant? $18 times more land, 10 times more water, 9 times more fuel, 14 times more fertilizer, pesticides. Huge. Huge impacts. All right, I'm going to walk you through class now and show you each unit so you kind of get the flow. Next week, we start with the basics. We do a unit on horticulture and botany, basically just the plant. Where do plants come from? How do they grow? For some of you, especially if you already have college or even good high school work in botany, horticulture, sciences, will be a remedial for you. But for some of you, it'll be important. The week after that, I do a unit on selection. We apply the basics and then look at how we select our fruits and vegetables based on growth. And in particular, we look at things like maturity. Day 4, we define sustainability, big picture. Day 5, we look at fruit and vegetable practices, production. We look at the supply chain. Day 6, really the same supply chain, but we swap it out for animal proteins. Where does our food come from? Well, you need to understand how we produce it in this country. or across the world. And we also talk about alternatives. There are some better ways. The question is, can these new approaches still produce the same amount of food? And that's up in the air now. Day 7, we look at water and agriculture. We've already seen some statistics there, 80%, 90% of all water is used in agriculture. Day 8, we do a unit on soils. Our food grows on soil. Soil provides the nutrient, the anchor. There are some big issues relative to soil management, especially in developed countries. We've grown significant production on the same soils for a century now. The soil is depleted. There are no nutrients. If there's no nutrients, you can't grow food unless you amend. You add nutrients to the soil. That's basically our system. Didn't have to be that way. Day 9, we look at energy. Food is energy. We use energy in every element of the supply chain. In fact, if you look at detailed information, it might surprise you, but your diet has the equivalent energy input for an individual's diet as the average individual uses in their automobile or they use for transportation. Think about that. That's pretty clear because you have to fill up the car. You know how much energy you use. Maybe you put in 10 gallons a week. Well, your diet uses 10 gallons a week as well. Can we talk about waste? Can we get under the covers? What are some of the rationales? Why do we have this waste? Why can't we be more efficient? Why don't we utilize it? What are some better approaches? And then in day 11, we do biodiversity. What are the impacts to our species, to genetic diversity, to our ecosystems associated with our food system? That's the class in a nutshell. Any comments? Do you think it's important? Yes. It really is, folks. I mean, once you understand it, you will be committed, and then the next step is, what can we do? And again, as an individual, you can do a lot. Choice does matter. A single person, by cutting their consumption in half of animal protein, makes a huge difference. It's worth tons of carbon in our atmosphere. And the more people that buy in, the more people that commit themselves to be more efficient practices, a better focus on conservation, the better off we'll be. All right, before I let you go, any comments, any questions? Anything you're not clear on? Anything you want to discuss based on what you saw today? Looks like it stopped raining. For a minute there, it looked pretty bad, but we're all going to have to sit here in the afternoon. All right, well, I look forward to teaching you next week. Again, what do you do when you come class this Thursday? Day 2, read the introduction to botany horticulture. Look at the key terms. Read this Johns Hopkins Center for Livable Future Food System Primer and the UNFAO's Basic Understanding of Agriculture. All set? All right, see everybody on Thursday.
Actually, no, I have 2 points left. Yeah, it was 10 points. And half a point per ounce. So that really would have meant that I got 20 ounces like through in there. I don't think so. Yeah, but they're not supposed to weigh the bowl, they're supposed to weigh the bowl. That's not how you charge.